Get at the top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
And I'll bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I am your host, Patrick Jordan, a 38-year veteran of law enforcement. On this show, we go over crime-related or police dramas with some guests, and we give our opinion of the show. We talk about our own careers, and we get into our show today is going to be Magnum Force. It's the second in the series of Dirty Harry, and I'll get into that in a minute. But before I do that, I want to talk about the Los Angeles Mission. The Los Angeles Mission is an outfit that helps people on the Skid Row. We have the largest concentration of homeless people in any major municipality in Los Angeles, in downtown Los Angeles, commonly referred to as Skid Row, and the LA Mission has been servicing them for the last 85 years. What they do is they provide basic services for those who are living on the streets. They'll give them a bed for the night if they're interested. They'll give them a place to shower. They'll give them some basic clothing like socks and underwear and some basic medical treatments and anything they might need. But while they're doing this, they're also trying to do intervention to get people off the streets. And when they make the decision to get off the streets, they provide wraparound services that deal with their addictions, either alcohol or drugs, any other medical issues they might have, including mental health issues. And they give them cognitive behavioral therapies, which is kind of the gold standard. If you're going to get somebody off the street, you have to change how they think and how they act. And that is part of the treatment. They give them a long-term bed for the night in a dormitory kind of style living. And they arrange for them to get work. And they rebuild their lives and reintegrate them back into society. So Los Angeles Mission does a great job. You can find them at losangelesmission.org. Please look them up, check them out, and make a small donation. Anything will help. $25, $50, $100. Do your good deed for the day and make a contribution to the Los Angeles Mission. Again, that's losangelesmission.org. And feel good about yourself. Make a donation today. So today, let's bring in our guests as we get into this movie. And again, the movie is Magnum Force. My first guest is Detective Danny R. Smith. Now, Danny has been on the show before. I think he came on when we did the Onion Field. Danny is a retired homicide detective for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Danny and I never worked together before, but I heard about him and I saw that he writes books. I thought he'd be a great guest, and he has proven to be a great guest in the past, and he's agreed to come on today. Danny, how are you doing today? And please tell us about your books.
I'm doing well, Chief. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. So I write mostly fiction. I have two different novel series, the Dickie Floyd Detective Series and the Rich Ferris series, Detective Series. And I've also written one nonfiction, and that's my memoirs, and it's called Nothing Left to Prove. And that's it pretty much covers my entire career and a lot of the interesting things that you see when you're a homicide detective in Los Angeles. And so it's been pretty popular.
So where can they, besides, let's see, DickieFloydNovels.com, where else can they find your books? Can they find them on Amazon?
Yeah, all my books are on Amazon, and you can find me. My website's DickieFloydNovels.com or themurdermemo.com. And I have a blog called The Murder Memo. I'm not as prolific as I once was on that blog, but I there's a lot of stories on there that are kind of fun to read, and mostly it's a true crime blog.
So Danny, I know we talked a little bit about this before in the previous show, but I want to give the breadth of experience that you have as a homicide investigator for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. There's homicide investigators from all across the country, but if you're working in a major municipal area, you're dealing with a high level of crime, and just the volume of homicides that someone working in New York or Los Angeles or the LA County Sheriff's Department or Chicago. Just give us a breadth of how many homicide investigations you handled for how many years.
So I had, I believe it was 143 or 148 homicide cases when I was assigned there. That's as a homicide detective, and of course, as throughout the rest of your career working patrol and everything, you get involved in other homicide cases. But those were assigned to me. I was at homicide for 7 years, and that's a lot. It's a steady diet. Once you get there, you get busy, and you never again. It's very difficult to keep your head above water, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I freely admit, and I told Danny before, I was a detective for a short period, and I said, "Oh, I think I like the clean life of patrol." I mean, it's hard to believe, but you are definitely case management when you're doing homicide, and you're the guy that, or any investigations, you're the guy or gal that has to pull it together, and you're the linchpin for the case many times. And yeah, but you're also, it's a comment that I've heard other homicide investigators say, and I've heard in publicly, is the homicide investigators are truly the people who speak for the victims, and I believe that. And I have always seen the homicide investigators, even though I've never wanted to do that job, as people who are really committed. They put their heart into it. Sometimes it takes a toll on them, as we've talked about in the past, but they do speak for the victims. You agree with that sentiment, don't you?
Oh, absolutely, and you're right. It does take quite a toll on most people that do that type of work. One of the things about it, you mentioned, the clean living, or I forget what you described it as, clean something of working patrol. Well, at the end of the day, when you work patrol, you close your locker and shut the Sam Brown inside, and you go home, and the next day you start anew. um, Homicide, you're never done working, and in fact, I mean, most of your vacations are interrupted, your days off are interrupted, your day and night, you're getting phone calls and messages, and you're responding to things. Even when you're not on call for murder, you'll get a call at 3 in the morning where a gang cop in Compton found a guy that you've been looking for, and you might not even be a suspect, just someone you needed to talk to on a case. And when I first got there, one of my mentors, actually is one of my mentors all the way back from working Firestone, Mark Lilyfield. He told me, he said, "Hey, you're going to get calls at 3 in the morning, and some gang cop's going to say, 'Hey, I've got Flacco down here that you need to talk to,' and he said, and you get your ass up, you put a suit on, and you go talk to him. And if you don't, then don't you dare ever ask another gang cop or anyone else to be looking for someone." And that's how I operated. So it's a burnout. You work all the time. I coordinated a rolling surveillance on my way home from Big Bear with my wife. I tried to get away for the weekend, and most of the weekend went well. And then a surveillance crew that was looking for someone that we were looking for on a murder, they get a hold of me, and so literally I have my wife drive, and I'm on two different phones, and coordinating all of this activity all the way down the hill, whenever I had reception. And it's just that's and then as soon as we got home, kissed her goodbye, threw on a suit, and I was gone for another 12 hours. So that's the life of a homicide detective in a big city. And man, it's exciting, it's fun, it's rewarding, it's also very taxing. And there's a huge it's a burden. It really is. It's an honor and it's a burden.
Well, that's why yeah, we'll just do something that we need to talk about, and that's when you cut back resources, defund the police movement, because what you're hearing, and obviously I retired as a chief, so I'm used to dealing with budgets, and I understand the pluses and minuses of a budget, and what homicide investigations are resource intensive, right? In addition to obviously the investigative support, which you're hearing about today, it's getting the teams together when you're taking somebody down that's a high profile guy. It's also getting the CSI guys out there and doing their thing. It's a resource intensive endeavor to solve crimes, particularly homicides. But it's one of those things where you have to do it, right? It's a necessary evil. So when you start this defund the police mode and you reduce money to law enforcement and particularly homicide investigators, you're going to reduce the ability to clear those cases, to solve them, to put people in prison, or to get the best outcome with that investigation. So do you kind of agree with that, Danny?
Yeah, and I'll tell you a dirty little secret. I don't know if it's still this way, but when I was working there, they would limit our overtime. Sometimes it was 20 hours a month, sometimes it was 30, never over 30. And the truth was, you would usually catch 2 murders a month, sometimes more. But, on one case, you're going to burn up 20, 30 hours overtime in the first 3 days. And, most of the time, most of us put in a hell of a lot of hours that we were never compensated for ever. So, and that's just the way it is. The type of people that typically uh, found themselves at homicide with the sheriff's department, it's considered, a very elite unit. But those people were very self-motivated, hard chargers, and we worked, unfortunately for free quite a bit. It's just nature of the job, part of it.
And most of the public doesn't know that or understand that. Well, let's get into our second guest. Our second guest is Deputy Mike Ascolese. He's also retired from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Mike and I worked together way back, and he told me the story as we were in the green room, I guess, we was waiting to start the show, about his first night in patrol, and it was actually with me. And in West Hollywood, where we chased some robbery suspects. And I, for me, it was just another Friday night, but it was his first night, so he remembered everything. But we rode together his first night, and then he trained with his FTO. I was just somebody who was available at the time, and we've been friends ever since. And so Mike is also he has friends in Hollywood, actors and producers and whatnot, and he also is big into the music scene. And but Mike also does some charity stuff. So Mike, tell us a little bit about what you got going on today, and who might be watching us.
Well, good morning, Chief. So I know Alex Van Halen's watching you, so you better do a bang-up job for this guy. I did 35 plus years on the Sheriff's Department, and yeah, my first night in patrol was with you. I loved patrol. I had a great time. I worked the courts also, and a few other crazy things. But the best thing I ever did with the department was charity work with Fueled by the Fallen. We built the Los Angeles County Memorial Cruiser, and that car has the names of every single police officer within the county of LA killed in the line of duty since the year 1850. The car is still active and handled by the LA County Sheriff's Department. But it all began with Kevin Major Howard. Most people know him as the actor Rafter Man from the movie Full Metal Jacket. And he's the one who came up with this nonprofit organization. And it started off with hot rods that honored all the soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And later went in, we did law enforcement, and he let me help him with that. So of all the things to honor our fellow officers, that was one of the biggest honors I had on the Sheriff's Department.
And where can they find this organization at again, Mike? What's the website?
It's Fueled by the Fallen. I believe they're on Facebook now.
They're on Facebook. Okay. So
yeah.
they just Google Fueled by the Fallen on Facebook, and they can find it and make a donation. Martin, can we have a picture of the memorial card? I think I sent you a couple pics and see what they're talking about. Martin, are you there? There we go.
Yes, I lost connection.
Oh, he's lost connection. We're looking for a picture of the memorial card. Do you have? Can you put that up?
Give me a second. This one?
Yeah, that's it. And so fueledbythefallen.com. Is that still accurate, Mike?
They're not using the .com. I think it's just on Facebook.
It's on Facebook. Can you flip over to the other one, which has the other car? I think I sent you a couple pics, Martin.
Yeah, this one.
There we go. There's Mike, and there's a picture of. Has this car been retired, Mike, or is it still active?
No, it's still active. It's not used as much as when I had it because I used to use it on a daily basis. But I have seen it used. That's the torch run that we do annually, and that's headquarters actually, right in the front parking lot.
Okay, that's my last office was headquarters.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the Lennox rides. We were always the lead car, and I borrowed Captain America that day. If you don't know what Captain America is, oh boy, shame on you.
Is that the motorcycle? That's the Captain American motorcycle?
Yeah,
I
so
don't.
that's from Easy Rider with Peter Fonda.
Oh my God, there's another good movie, kind of a cult classic. All right, well, hey, so make a donation to help Mike's endeavor, and also go on Amazon and buy a book from Danny R. Smith there. And let's get into the show here. So today we're going to do Magnum Force. Magnum Force was released. It's the second in the series, the Dirty Harry series, and it was released in 1973. It's an American neo-noir crime drama. It's basically a vigilante action thriller film starring Clint Eastwood, of course, and it was directed by Ted Post. And I don't think I like this one as much as I like the original, but we'll get into that a little bit. Danny, did you watch the movie? And I know you watched Dirty Harry as well. Did you watch the movie? Did you like it? And how do you compare it to the first one?
Funny thing, Chief, is that when the Dirty Harry movies came out, I was actually young back then, very young, and I think, oh gosh, I think I was in junior high when the first one came out, and my dad took me to the movies to see it, and of course, those movies aren't exactly clean, so it was kind of a shock in some ways. I was pretty young, and it became our thing. He took me to each movie when they came out, so the Dirty Harry series is got a special place in my heart. But I haven't seen any of the movies for probably close to 30 years or 40 years maybe. And so going back, it was interesting. They were different than I remembered them being. And of course, everything, technology has changed so much, especially with movies. So they're almost, in some ways, they're a little bit corny compared to a production of today's movie. It's just different. So but I enjoyed it. I mean, Dirty Harry, I mean, it might have been one of the reasons I ended up wanting to be a cop. But who doesn't like the good guys out there making the bad guys pay for their crimes?
Well, this one's a little different than the first one, as I recall, it was Dirty Harry was considered I forget what they call it. He's a hero, but he's kind of that dark hero. The ends justify the means. Somebody's got to do something because the crime is out of control, and there was a lot of criticism about it. But in this one, the theme, the plot is there's these rogue police officers around killing anybody, and Dirty Harry ends up being the hero, taking out the rogue police officer. So it's a little. It's kind of goofy in terms of its plot, but I mean, I just love all the quips with Dirty Harry and from the movie, the first one and this one, and actually the whole series. But I never heard that. So bonding, dad and son bonding was Dirty Harry series. Now, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
no, I had no clue that was, but that's pretty good. I don't think my dad ever took me to these movies. My dad's a retired cop, but I don't know if my mom would have let him. So Mike, did you see the movie and did you enjoy the movie?
I rented it the other day and watched it again. I've seen it a whole bunch of times. I enjoyed all the Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry movies, every single one, and especially this one. He was the tough guy, but he was still a true blue cop. And they like he said in the movie, they misjudged him. He was tenacious. He never let anything go. Usually the smartest guy in the room, and his quips to people, some of them just didn't get it, which made it even funnier because he was being as mean as possible, but it came out in such a straight tone, and just never give up. Very observant, except for in this movie, which was a little surprising as I watched it again. He didn't catch on the lieutenant was part of all this thing until it was too late. He figured out the cops, but he didn't figure out that it was his own boss. And
and the lieutenant knew that he was a threat. That's why he moved him out of homicide, and we'll get into that. And it's the thing about having okay, so I retired as a chief, so you always got the smart guy in the room that's got to make the smart comment too. And I think other executives got that way more than me, but you do have hard-boiled, seasoned police officers, deputy sheriffs who get frustrated with the bureaucracy and the drama and people playing things politically correct, and they do make those kind of quips. Now, I was very thick-skinned, and I said, "Yeah, okay, whatever. You're an adult, you know the score. You don't get to, you can say whatever you want, but we all got to march in the direction." What do you think? I mean, that happens, Danny, right? And usually, a good executive is the guy that just looks at him, says, "All right, you've had your say. Now get back to work," right? The sensitive one is the one who takes it all personal, right?
Yeah, and of course, there's a lot of emotion in the job, so those things come out. I remember having a few little arguments or encounters with brass, and one of them was with the captain of Firestone Station at the time, right after Nelson Yamamoto was killed in the line of duty, and I said some things that I kind of regretted saying later, but I thought he did something that was inappropriate, and but there's emotions, and like you said, once a guy gets seasoned and he becomes a little salty, and I was one of those guys where someone used to say, I was once told that I was the kind of guy that would tell Jesus his zipper was down, but I don't know if that's true or not, but yeah, I mean, it happens.
I was on the scene of remember the chaplain who got murdered, the ride-along chaplain? I was the field sergeant for that mess. So the deputy got shot in the face, half his face got blown off. He ended up surviving. But his chaplain ride-along was chased down and murdered. And I mean, I was like, it was week 1 for me as a sergeant, and I ended up organizing the containment. We must have had 150 between LAPD and us, people down there looking for this guy. And I had actually contacted the suspect earlier in the evening, had his name in my notebook, and LAPD was hard to work with. It's our area, we're in control, but it's our guy in uniform. And it was a lot of drama until the LAPD homicides got there and slapped down their uniforms and said, these guys are in charge, right? And but I realized where the guy was at, because one of my deputies says, "Hey, I think it might be that guy we talked to earlier in the night. Do you know his name?" I go, "Yeah, I got his name in my notebook and his address." And I chose to have LAPD go take him down because I wasn't sure what would happen if I sent the deputies in there. And so they got him out, and he's sitting on the sidewalk. Now it's probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 in the morning. It's chilly out. It's down near San Pedro area, so it's a little colder because of the ocean. And we had this assistant sheriff roll up, and he yelled at us, "Why doesn't this suspect have a blanket on him?" I can tell you that the last thing those deputies wanted to hear was being chastised that we didn't get the suspect a blanket, who we just took out of his bed after he murdered a chaplain ride-along, a volunteer for the station, and nearly killed a deputy sheriff and maimed him for life. That was the last thing they wanted to hear. So sometimes, I get it. Okay, yeah, we need to give him a blanket, but that's one of those ones where you quietly go to the sergeant and you whisper in his ear, "Hey, get a blanket on this guy."
Exactly.
Right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That's how to do it, instead of saying it publicly like somehow we all did something wrong.
Right.
But yeah, so sometimes they're just and the guy was a decent guy, executive, in terms of support for his troops, but that night he was clearly tone deaf and didn't understand it. What do you think, Mike?
I think that particular brass should have offered his jacket instead.
Yeah, there you go. So anyway, so you've both seen the movie. It's a good movie, and basically, let's throw into the first scene, Martin, with just the most powerful handgun in the world. And I kind of had to do this scene because it's reminiscent of the first Dirty Harry movie, and I just love the quote, because I just remember there were some deputies and other police officers that were kind of in my orbit that they could quote this thing. This is Magnum. This is a 44 Magnum, most powerful handgun in the world, and it can blow your head clean off your shoulders. Do you feel lucky? Right? So they could quote that, and I've heard them quote it in briefings. So that kind of ended up in the culture of law enforcement to some degree, just the whole allure of the 44 Magnum and the comments, right? What do you think, Mike? That's Hollywood became culture, right? With that comment.
It definitely it still has an effect because people still remember it. That was the Smith & Wesson Model 29, something we weren't allowed to carry. But back then, we all carried the Model 686 357 Magnums. And the taller guys usually carried the 6-inch barrel. So it looked very similar to what Dirty Harry was carrying. And I got to tell you, to this day, as much as I love the Beretta, you pull out a chrome 686 6-inch barrel, that definitely got someone's attention.
Yeah, I think as an investigator, it was before we switched over to the Berettas. I carried a 2.5-inch 357, and I really liked the gun. It was not too heavy shooting, but I just was better at shooting with that with just my 38, and that's what I carried until they forced me to switch over to the Berettas. Danny, what do you think of the comment? I mean, you're writing books now, right? So you're writing culture, and that just hits with the culture of law enforcement and in our community, right?
Yeah, and I mean, of course, it's classic lines, lines that always remember, and I think every fan of Clint Eastwood, it's just it's just so him, and of course, he's got this appearance about him, even just the way he'll turn and look at the chief of police or whatever, and you just see this contempt all over his face, and then of course, he's got a classic line that he throws out on his way out the door, just to rub it in. I think, as Mike said, he's the smartest guy in the room. But yeah, I mean, it's classic lines, and that's what makes a story really good.
And that's what makes it entertaining for a father and son to go to it, right? That's
yeah, exactly.
Oh wow,
exactly.
Dad, did you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think the one-liners on this are really make the whole series, because they always seem to have a one-liner, and I think in this one, it's a man's got to know his limitations is a big one that he says in this movie, and I always remembered that one because there are a lot of guys who were punching above their ability in our career, right? And it would have been a perfect line to say to some of those guys at the time. Man's got to know his limitations.
And then he finishes it with, "Well, do you, punk?"
Well,
It's, "Well, do you, punk?"
Yeah.
I mean, it's just cool. Yeah.
Well, you saw the first one, right? So right at the end there, he says that line to I forget, Scorpio was the name of the serial killer in that
Right.
one, and he says it with the intent, yeah, go ahead, punk. I want you to go for that gun, right? He's just fooling around in the first scene when he does with the black guy. But we also have a lot of other good people in this movie. And Mike, you gave me a whole list of guys. I appreciate you doing the research, but and maybe we'll talk about it. But we're gonna eventually introduce some of these guys, and let's roll right into. Oh, on this first scene, let me go back. So in the first scene, they set up the notion that because of some technicalities, people are getting off, that the justice system doesn't work. And that was a theme at the time in the 70s and early 80s. And that's what brought 3 strikes and other legislation that allowed us to get a little tougher on crime. And they're laying this out by saying this mobster got off on a technicality. I'm surprised that I think it looked like he was being prosecuted locally, but I would think the feds would have been deeply involved in prosecuting a gangster. And I think coming out of the 70s into the 80s, I think we got to get into this. There was a belief that the criminal justice system did not work for the public, and people were given too many chances, and they're getting off, right? And Danny, what do you think of that? That's a theme in here, and that was probably going on when you first joined the sheriff's department. Do you agree?
Well, yeah, and there were other movies I was thinking about that while I was watching Magnum Force, and it reminded me there were the Charles Bronson movies, right? The vigilante theme, and then there was the Michael Douglas movie Star Chamber, so along those lines of it was kind of hey, if the justice system isn't taking care of it, some tough guy or some tough people will. And of course, we can't and we don't condone vigilante action, but for entertainment, it's kind of a hoorah. It's like, yeah, that's right, wipe out the bad guy.
And I feel that's why this series, which was mostly started in early 70s, I think I can't remember the last movie, but through the 80s, and it was that people's frustration that they were able to tap into, and we got tough on crime there, and we had a lot of success. I threw out this stat in 1993 we had 13.1 homicides per 100,000 in California. By 2014 we had down by 4.4. So cops did their job. The criminal justice, we heard the message from the public and we did our job. Unfortunately, we've made a U-turn and crime is going back up. We're letting people out. It's really hard to get people in prison now, and we have people in charge in California. There's no repercussion for bad policy because it's a blue-dominated state. Both you guys are California refugees. You've left the state for safer places or people that are more who actually enforce the law and care about community safety. Mike, do you agree that we did a good job and now it's made a U-turn and people are getting frustrated with the criminal justice system today? This theme is coming back.
Even if you take the theme from this movie, Magnum Force, these rogue officers, if that was filmed today, they wouldn't be going after the bad guys. They'd be going after the politicians or the DA or who have drastically changed what's going on in criminal justice. And I think if that movie today, those would be the targets.
Yeah, and I think the one bad side about crime dramas, and I said this on just about every show, is people watch these. Things are dramatized. Unrealistic scenarios are about the movie or in the plot, and people think this is real to a lot of degrees. And of course, I can't think of anything like this in real life that ever happened. Either the first movie or this movie, where in this one you have real cops that are running around killing everybody. But the theme is people are frustrated. They want somebody to do something. Dirty Harry is the guy that does something, and that is the ongoing theme of all of his movies. And getting justice for the people who have been denied justice. And right now we're I think just the tenor of the day is. Justice is not for the victims. Justice is for the suspects. This seems to be where we're going. And I think eventually there's going to be a reckoning for these politicians, although I think it's far off for us here in California. Anyway, so some of the people that, let's roll right back into the next scene. And this scene is the assassination of the gangster who just got off. So they roll out of the courthouse, and these guys are basically that era's version of high-fiving. They're very happy they got off. They got off with a technicality, and it's interesting. So these guys are gangsters that got off, and I can't help but forget about the Gotti situation. He used to get off a lot, but he used to corrupt the jury system. He used to buy jurors. They used to do that kind of stuff. So he always got off. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's going on here in San Francisco. San Francisco is one of those cities that's kind of ran like a European, or not, I'm sorry, East Coast city, where corruption was a little more, now I don't want to say expected, but prevalent, and it took longer to deal with than say in LA. I don't think they had a Parker up there in San Francisco. So anyways, what the interesting thing about this scene is when I watch this, so this cop pulls him over, this motorcycle cop pulls him over, or we believe he's a motorcycle cop, pulls him over, and then he executes everybody in the car. And one of the things that I was stuck with was it just reminded me, just the whole uniform, the black, the helmet, it just reminded me of RoboCop. I mean, I don't know if you got that feel. He walks up, he says very little, and then he pulls out his gun and he just starts shooting people. And it just kind of had this whole RoboCop thing. Mike, what do you think about that? You think maybe this helped inspire RoboCop a little bit?
Well, perchance. What was amazing with these guys was how brazen. This is daylight. Anyone could see that. In today's society, everyone's got a cell phone. This thing would have been on film somewhere on CCTV. I mean, it would have been. He couldn't have got away with it. And some good shooting.
Well, I would say, one of the things about the motorcycles and is they tend to blend into the woodwork a little bit more. You don't see a motorcycle cop; they're not as prevalent as somebody in a police car, right? You see the police car long before you see a motorcycle cop, which makes them effective for enforcing traffic. Probably is why they probably is why they are using motorcycle cops in this as the tool for doing this, right? And the fact that he kills all of them, which is surprising me, because lots of times, it's going to take a lot more than just one shot to kill a guy. But and the weapon used, he used a 357. Danny, did you carry a 357 when you were working at all, or no?
Well, Chief, as you know, we weren't allowed to carry 357s. We could carry the gun, but the ammunition was the 38 plus B plus. And yes, of course, I carried that through the majority of my patrol career. It was right at the end when we switched to the Berettas, and I hated the Berettas. I was a distinguished expert shooter with my revolver, and I carried a 6-inch 38 and a Model 15. No, I'm sorry, Model 14, I think it was. It was the gun that LAPD used to issue way back in the 70s. And it was a cool gun, very unique. But I didn't get into the 686 craze like most of my colleagues did. But I love that gun. And then we go to Berettas, and man, my scores dropped 20 points. I was down in the 270s. I could barely hit the target with that thing. I just never liked it. And one of my buddies called it a Fiat with bullets, because it's Italian made. And fortunately, shortly after that, I made detectives, and we were given a little leeway with which types of guns we would carry. And I never carried the Beretta. I carried an H&K P7, which I loved, and then my scores went back up.
Yeah, I was really good with my revolver. I wouldn't say I was as good a shot as you, but I was comfortable with it. Click, click, boom, click, click, boom. I was so comfortable with it, and I say both for the 38 that they issued me, and then the 357 I ultimately carried as a detective. And I liked the 357 because it was kind of a heavier gun, so it a little less recoil, and so you could get a better score. What I found about the Beretta is. I'm not a small guy, but I wouldn't say it takes somebody with a bigger hand to manipulate that thing and so you're moving your hand around to drop the slot or drop the magazine thing, and it just, that manipulation of the gun just to reload and all that other stuff is and I just love the way you see it when Dirty Harry, when he's reloading using the speed loaders. It's just yes, you're definitely taking the gun on your hand and you're dumping your rounds, but you're coming right back up on target. It's like the handle is a lot smaller. It's just a lot easier. I definitely like the revolver, and so I know what you mean. I was never quite as good with the Beretta than I was, but I will say I was a chief and I went to shoot, right? And I was in one of those trailers. You have 3 people, and I'm in line, and it's me and 2 people working patrol. I was the only guy that passed. I was like, holy smokes. And I was worried because in your chief, you don't go through, when you make lieutenant, you stop going to the combat range, you stop going to that stuff. So the only shooting you get is you don't go to Hogan's Alley, you don't do any of that stuff. You just qualify. That's it. So 3-4 times a year you're qualified. That's all the shooting you do. And it's a perishable skill. And I had started shooting with my son a little bit just because he wanted to learn how to shoot at as an adult. But I was shocked that I was the only one who passed. And I really think at the time I realized, well, we need to invest more in training. And I asked the guy, well, is this the guy that runs in the range? Is this usually? He goes, yeah, this happens all the time. So, but we took a lot of pride in shooting when I first came on. Mike, what do you think?
One thing, and you guys are old timers. The other part of having those big guns that we carried, the wheel guns, we all carried either a Nelson or a Hoyt holster with things strapped down next to your knee. We were gunslingers. It was just like a cowboy in the movies, and they were cool.
The break front.
I had a partner. I carried the standard one that they issued, right? And my partner says, and I had just whatever department. And he bought me extra speed loader pouches. He said, no, you got to have more. You never know. I guess I was just being stubborn and cheap, but like I said, I still like the revolvers more so than anything else. Hey, Martin, let's roll into the next scene. And wait a minute, we need to talk about our co-stars here. And Mike, I got to hit you up here. So Hal Holbrook is in this thing, right? And we're going to see some of these other guys come in, but I want to talk them now because they don't come until deep in the movie. David Soul is in this movie, and I remember David Soul from Starsky and Hutch, right?
Correct.
And he did another show. He did it was a show about vampires. I can't remember Salem's Lot, I think is the name of it.
Salem's Lot, correct.
And it was a TV series, I believe, but it was based upon the books by who's the horror writer? I can't. Stephen King, I think. And I really liked him in that one too. And but Starsky and Hutch is his big claim to fame. And Cliff Yates is going to do a show for me next week. Yeah, I'm going to be on vacation, so he's going to do guest host a show. He's going to do,
cool.
I think, Super Cops from New York, and so I looked up the background on it, and I'll let him talk about it. But it was the inspiration for the TV series. Those two guys were the inspiration for the TV series Starsky and Hutch. So it's kind of weird how culture kind of intersects on different movies and different TV shows. But David Soul's in it. Tim Matheson is in this movie. Now, I always remember Tim Matheson from the 1980s anthem. I think it was 1980s came out, Animal House.
Correct.
Remember him? He was the prime guy in Animal House. He was I don't think he was the president of the fraternity, but he was kind of the leader of the fraternity, the Animal House kind of thing. And he ended up getting lumped up. And I remember, hey, who did this? Well, it was Timmy. It was this and that. But he was in the movie, and that's what I remember. He's in a series now. I think I forget the name of it. It's kind of one of these Hallmark kind of lovey-dovey series right now on streaming service. But I remember him from Animals because I love the movie. I love that movie.
He was the voice of John Quest. When I was a kid, that was my favorite cartoon. And
Johnny Quest
for years.
Yeah, well, do you have anything to say about? I mean, we already mentioned David Soul. Anything to add to my comments on David?
We all loved him in Starsky and Hutch, and other people in this movie were also in Starsky and Hutch from time to time. Carl Weathers, he appeared on the show and was in Magnum Force. Suzanne Summers, same thing. So it's a small little circle in there, and they use a lot of the same actors at that time.
And
Carl Weathers, I can't recall Carl Weathers
in the show.
No, in Magnum Force, no. I'm trying very hard, but I can't recall him.
All right, Mike. Well, let's let Martin know where was.
Okay, so Carl was one of the demonstrators in the beginning of the movie when those guys are leaving the courthouse. If you blink, you're not going to see him. I mean, it was that quick. He wasn't even credited in the movie, but he definitely was in it. Same with Suzanne Summers. She had a 3-second part in there. She was at the pool scene where they killed everybody at the pool. The one cop killed everyone. And she was the girl that had just gotten engaged. And she gets in the pool and, let's say, alters her bikini or less of it.
Yeah,
and then she shot right away.
And I obviously I didn't notice that was Suzanne Summers, so maybe I wasn't looking at her face. I don't know. So.
Neither did I. The ones that I noticed besides David Soul, of course, was Robert Urich. He was one of the other.
Dan Tanner, right? Vegas. He was in Vegas. Dan Tanner, Robert Urich,
and SWAT.
And SWAT.
And Felton Perry, the guy who plays Harry's partner, who was in RoboCop. He was he was one of the team members that created RoboCop.
Well, I think the other one that I like, and I did him, I really like him, is John Mitchum. Now, he was in the first Dirty Harry. He's got a recurring role to Giorgio in these, but he was also somebody that was in a lot of Clint Eastwood movies. I remember him from Josie Wales, so the outlaw Josie Wales, but he's been in a lot of them, and he is Robert Mitchum's brother. So he had a successful career as a character actor.
He was in Dirty Harry. He was in The Enforcer, High Plains Drifter, Paint Your Wagon, Josie Wales, and then he was in the TV show Clint Eastwood when he played Rowdy Yates in the TV show Rawhide, which my mom actually was in Rawhide a couple times. So that's going way back in Eastwood's career.
What was her role? And
she's one of the small people in the background,
It's an extra role, huh?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so these are the people in the movie. It's interesting, and they do they do intersect. And of course, Carl Weathers, another iconic act, or was in an iconic movie, The Rocky, down the road. So let's get into the next scene, and this is hijacking and the hijacking, and this kind of sets up Clint Eastwood. You kind of saw that in the first one too. They had the robbery with them eating the hot dog, and then he ends up at the shootout at the bank robbery. But this kind of sets up who Clint Eastwood is. He's the guy that he doesn't take any guff from anybody, and he'll do the dirty jobs. And he's at the airport talking with a friend about what might be going on, that these guys are all getting these bad guys are getting assassinated. Former homicide guy who's running a hot dog stand. Danny Smith, I'm glad you're writing books and not writing a hot dog stand. But so he's there. He's there during this hijack. Now, this wouldn't happen today, where somebody hijacks a plane and just some San Francisco detective or LA detective happens to be in the area, and he's going to disguise himself as a pilot. But he goes on the plane, and they're looking for a pilot who can be an overseas pilot, and he pretends to be that guy, and he walks on the plane. They search him, and I was thinking as I was watching the scene, I go, I can't remember where he kept his gun, because they searched him, and then after, of course, I watched the scene. He's driving the plane, and the real pilot says, "Can you fly this thing?" He says, "Not at all. Never had a lesson," or whatever he said. And he puts on the brakes, which, again, how do you know where the brake is at on those things? And he ends up
Right.
punching out one of the first hijacker and using his gun. Because I remembered the scene where he got the second hijacker when I was watching. I go, where did he hide his gun? I don't remember. Well, he didn't. He just used the other guy's gun, which is, I mean, this wouldn't happen today. We'd have it contained. I don't know what. Back then, they actually let some planes go, and they flew to Cuba or wherever, right? And hijacking was a big deal back then. It happened back then. What'd you think of the scene? It kind of sets up who Dirty Harry is. Danny, what do you think?
Yeah, and it's fun watching these older movies, because it takes you back, like just seeing the interior of the plane. It's kind of a crack up, and that's back when, people would smoke on the plane. I,
Yeah.
I remember traveling like that, and it's, you're in this can, and half the people are smoking cigarettes. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a classic Dirty Harry, and of course it's as fake as it can be, but it was entertaining. And then the classic, he comes off the plane after taking care of these two bad guys, beating one unconscious and killing the other, and his lieutenant shows up, so he makes his comment, what are you doing here, or something like that, and it just walks off, because there's nothing to do after all that excitement. You just go back to being Dirty Harry. You don't have to write any reports or be interviewed or anything else, right?
Yeah, he's being snippy, because the first scene where the gangsters are murdered, Harry shows up because he's a homicide investigator that's been shifted to surveillance by his homicide lieutenant, Hal Holbrook here, another great actor who played Lieutenant Briggs. And it becomes obvious that he shifted him out of homicide because he didn't want Harry around as he does what he's going to do. And Hal Holbrook says to Harry, "What are you doing here at this murder scene?" And it gives him a hard time. Get back on surveillance. And so here it is, Harry. He takes care of this, and he throws that quip right back at the lieutenant. "What are you doing here?" So yeah, you're right, Mike. What'd you think of the scene?
Well, obviously, you're right. This would never happen today. As a kid watching it, or even as an adult now watching it, what bravado! It was incredible. I mean, you wished you could handle something like that. But like Danny said, he walked out, no paper. Man, you'd be there for 2 days writing paper on that thing. And then to be using the suspect's gun without even checking the thing. I mean, only in the movies.
Well, and here's that. So today, just to put so since all this hijacking stuff on since September 11th, now they have a barrier, and you can't get into that. You can't get into the cockpit area, right? They have a barrier, and they have certain protocols that they have to follow. I mean, I did anti-terrorism stuff for about 7-8 years. So I mean, I was going to Washington. So things have tightened up greatly. When you read back in the 70s, hijackings were much more prevalent. They obviously didn't fly planes into buildings or anything like that, but they would fly them to Cuba or fly them to a country that was more sympathetic to them. And I think we had one where they flew him to Lebanon and they killed a sailor, one of our sailors. So this was a much more prevalent thing in the 70s. This was going on a lot. So it was consistent with the time. How they handled it was not really consistent with how they handle those things at the time or how we do them today. But, these kinds of things are also why we develop responses to them. That's why you have SWAT teams. That's why you have arson explosives. That's why you build capacity so people can handle these types of situations, and we don't need a Dirty Harry all the time, right? And but I like how the guys are all getting up to get out of there, and Harry just yells at him, "Sit down," and then he takes a shot and manages to get him. Also Hollywood, because will it go through the wall? Who knows, right?
Well, actually, Chief, that was one of the things I found interesting, because I remember having training that told you, when a person's, out of view, like hiding, off the side of a window or a door, that you don't wait for them to pop back in, that you shoot through the wall. And so, I found that to be pretty accurate. And I thought, oh, that was interesting, because I mean, back in the 70s, I don't know if they actually trained to do that or not. Maybe we started training to do that after Dirty Harry showed us. I don't know. But
Well, look at
I'll tell
the
you,
death of David Powell on our department. He goes and knocks on the door. He wasn't standing in front of the door. He was off to the side, and the guy shot through and actually killed Dave. When it went through his shoulder patch and into his body and killed him.
yeah. One other thing about the hijacking and the whole dynamics of today versus then, I can tell you, as someone who traveled a lot, as a law enforcement officer, and before I went to homicide, I worked fugitive, and we were always on a plane going somewhere. And in a homicide, it seemed like we traveled just quite a bit. Also, you were always going around the country. People kill people and then they split. But it was interesting that when we travel, you travel armed, and you have a letter from your unit commander that you provide when you check in, and you're always pre-boarded, and they introduce you to the pilot, and the staff, and say, hey, these guys are law enforcement officers, they're armed, because the pilot wants to know who you are and where you're seated, and everything, when you are an armed agent. So after 9/11, what was really interesting is they treated us completely different. Like, they'd come back to you and say, we've got seats in first class, would you like to move up? I mean, if there was something, and in my opinion, it was just my opinion, but I kind of looked at it like, the pilots wanted us up front, and they embraced the fact that there was a law enforcement officer who was trained and armed on his plane. And it was just a very, very different environment after 9/11. And they supposedly picked up the amount of air marshals that were flying, but I never saw one. I never was ever on a plane where there was a marshal, because if I were, they would have introduced us. You wouldn't have two different armed law enforcement officers that didn't know each other were on the plane armed. That would be a disaster, or it could be.
I used to travel a lot, but it was for work, but it was more for going to a conference, speaking at a conference, or, just things like that. And it just getting a letter for somebody was a little more complicated. I imagine it was a lot easier for you guys because you guys did it, because homicide and fugitive, that's just it's probably an every other day thing. But trying to get the chain of command to approve something like that, and the time it took, I just like, so I would just pack my gun and my luggage stuff. But then that became a problem, because then you got to go through, everybody's got to look at it. It's like, so I said, you know what? I'm staying at a hotel, I'm going through training, I'm speaking at this event, and I'm with a bunch. And whenever you go somewhere, I started going, I was a higher rank. They got some deputy chief or chief with you. You're always with somebody who's armed. So I said, so I stopped taking my gun on those events, just because it was too hard or too much of a pain to do that stuff. So probably thinking back, I probably should have just grit down and took it. But protocols have changed. I think people need to understand it. It's a lot harder to hijack a plane now, where you're going to actually control the cockpit and get to the pilots, and that's a good thing. And I don't know why we didn't do that after the 70s and early 80s, because we had a ton of hijackings. on planes, and it should have been just standard. Now that they see the plane can be used as a missile, they've taken it a lot more serious. Okay, let's get into meeting our crew of, I guess, bad cops is the way we should say that, right? And so in this scene, Harry, of course, he's going to shoot, and he makes a comment as he's meeting these guys. He likes the way they shoot, but here you see him. So here's a young David Soul, and he's probably the main protagonist in this thing, and out of all of these guys, he seems to be the leader of the group here. They're all former military, probably all been in Vietnam at some time, because this was the time. And you also got Tim Matheson is in there as well. I think his nickname is Sweet. I forget the name of this actor, but I've seen him in other stuff. I don't think he made it quite as big as everybody else. And then you got Robert Urich as well. So all clean-cut guys, all motors. Now, I don't know how they do that, because I have to tell you, so they must have had somebody pushing for them. You know how hard it is to get on a motor on the sheriff's department or any of that. It's such a coveted position. To have a bunch of young guys on it is surprising to me, because they're all usually old grizzled guys who have paid their dues and are finally on a motor. But here's where we meet these guys, and they're all out there shooting on a regular basis to stay proficient, and that's what Harry initially likes about these guys, is they're shooting. They're all good shots, and they of course know the legend on the department, Dirty Harry. What'd you think of the scene, Mike? Any comments on the actors as well from the scene?
That was a good scene. Coming from a big department, sometimes it was rough trying to get to the range to shoot and qualify on time. To see these guys in there practicing, that part's really good. The one actor that you were talking about, you weren't quite sure you recognized it. That was Kip Niven. He also appeared on the TV show SWAT with Robert Urich and a bunch of other movies. The banter was good between them. I remember he said he was Special Forces. He was the only one identified as that. But I agree with you. They all probably were ex-military. And it was good, from my point as a deputy, to see these guys out there practicing all the time.
When I first joined, my first assignment was Wayside, and you could stop in. So you had to drive by the range to get to the jail that I was working at, but you could stop in and shoot as long as they had an open when they were doing qualifying. And so you didn't have to wait to qualify, and you could qualify and then go get some extra shooting. But if I remember correctly, shooting was when I joined. So I joined in '83. That's when I went through the academy. It was expected, it was kind of I don't want to say a badge of honor, but it was one of those skills that you were expected to maintain. It was a personal pride thing. And I think we went away from that on the sheriff's department as budgets interceded. Because you could go there and you don't have to buy the ammunition. They would give it to you at first, if I remember correctly, and later on you had to buy ammunition. What do you think, Danny? It was a personal pride thing. It was a culturally pride thing that you maintained proficiency in shooting, and it was a lot more expected when we first joined than later on in our careers. Do you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier too that once you made lieutenant, you no longer went to the various combat training scenarios, and the same goes for making detective. You no longer go to those types of things. But when I worked patrol, yeah, I mean, I did a lot of shooting, and of course we all knew that it was imperative that you kept your skills honed, and I enjoyed shooting. Once I made detective, it became a chore. And I remember, we went through different phases. There was a time where we qualified quarterly, and then there was a time where we qualified monthly. Yeah. And by time I'm working homicide, I can tell you this. I mean, just going to the range, even when they had mobile ranges everywhere, it was a pain. Because there was never enough time in the day for everything else, and it became more of a chore. I didn't enjoy it as much once I made detectives, or especially once I got to homicide. So.
Well, I could tell you when I first joined, you were expected to qualify every month. That's when I first joined it, and then because of budgetary issues, it went to once a quarter. And then it actually went to 3 times a year, so once every 4 months. Then it went back to like once a quarter, and I don't think it ever got back to once a month. But I think part of the reason why they added another training bay back in there once a quarter is they realized that, well, as I talked about earlier, I was in the range shooting and two people working patrol couldn't shoot, but it was culturally you were expected to be proficient. And I did so. I think there was a point in time when you can actually buy ammunition and shoot. So they didn't want to pay for the ammunition, but you could buy it. Mike, what do you think? That was a big deal for us when we first joined, but it kind of fell off as an expectation, in my opinion.
And Danny mentioned something early when he introduced himself. If I remember right, Danny, you said you were a DX?
Yes.
Okay, so back then, another part of pride, we wore that pin on our shirt if we made expert or distinguished expert. And that was something you saw on another officer, another deputy coming up. It was one of the things you looked at and you saw right away. And I had a guy in my academy class actually made the 300 pin and was awarded that right in the academy. The one thing that it was a personal beef of mine, I never thought we got as much training as I wanted. Like you said, as you went up the ranks, it went down in what you did. It was very rare to get combat training unless you were in a special unit. Laser Village was an awesome tool, but you didn't get to go there more than once or twice. I think we should have been able to do that. I worked at Laser Village for a few months, and the more I was there, the more I learned about it. That was really interesting. So I always wanted more training.
Yeah. Well, when in budget cuts, this is one of the reasons why, when they say defund the police, the very first casualty of budget cuts is training. I know this is executive because, your biggest budget is personnel and salaries. So when they say cut the police, well, the very first things they get cut are your training budget, your supply budget, and then they extend the lives of police cars because they don't want to cut staff because staff is really expensive to replace when you get refunded. And so because they're the first casualty, and then like any budgeting thing, when it's no longer a line item, you have to fight to get it back to be a line item. So when they say defund the police, we need more training for police, but then you defund the police, guess what? That's the very first thing that gets impacted,
Right.
and that's the realities of government. And the people that say that, some of the people who know how government works know what I'm talking about, and they say it anyways because they're saying it for political reasons. So if you want more training, you actually have to pay for it. If you want people to be more proficient, you have to pay for it. What Mike talks about in terms of Laser Village was very much like, when they go to the shooting scene and they're doing the competition here, they had situational stuff set up. Instead of using real bullets in the shooting, we used laser guns, so people would wear vests, and if you hit the target, the vest would go off. But basically, they were situational, and those types of situations, that's where you learn things like slicing the pie, and so that you can see who's behind a closed door, how to deal with the funnel of death, a doorway, going through a doorway, how to best do that. And when you're looking for a suspect, what are the best tactics to use to survive an outcome? And that's why Laser Village was so valuable. But of course, as the budget gets cut, less people are able to go. And then you start to prioritize those people are on the street versus those people who are working courthouses. So when you defund the police, you lose good homicide investigative support. You lose good training. It impacts the quality of what law enforcement do. Danny, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And of course there's different types of training that becomes mandated, and a lot of it most cops find ridiculous and a waste of time. And most of us, especially guys working the streets, we wanted, like Mike says, we wanted the Laser Village. We wanted to have more of the combat shooting and training. I loved I think they call it the PPC course up at Wayside, where you're running from one stage to another, behind different
barriers,
elements of cover, from a vehicle. You switch from shotgun to handgun, and I mean that stuff, man. And it was, I remember the instructors would actually run behind you and yell at you and stuff, do things to raise your adrenaline, because in a real shooting, that's you want to kind of train in that same environment. And that was the stuff, man. You finished and you're pumped and you're breathing and you're sweating, and that was the stuff that was real important and real necessary. And you're right. I mean, but the bigger the department, less likely you're going to have an intense amount of that. I've got friends and family members who work for smaller agencies, very, very good agencies in Southern California, and it's amazing the training that they get. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I think that's the handgun shotgun course that you're talking about. That's timed. You have to do it within a certain amount of time. And what I
Right.
liked about that
Yeah,
was
like 28 seconds or something.
as I said in a previous show, I liked using the shotgun, and that was the first part of that.
Yeah.
You have to exit the patrol car while retrieving the shotgun from its rack, right, and then come on
That's right.
target
Yeah.
and shoot your. I think it was your. Did you have to shoot? I think you had to shoot 4 rounds, and they expect you to reload. I think once or twice, and once you finish targets, you dump your shotgun, then you go to your handgun as part of the assault course. And obviously I'm talking about it with a great deal of I love that stuff. That was a lot
Did
of
you ever
fun.
get to do it at night?
I did do night shoots.
Oh, the night shoot. That was
yeah,
good too.
I did do night shoot.
Yeah.
Those were a little more challenging. I don't think we did handgun shotgun assault at night, but you had to do target shooting at night, which was a challenge, and then do skeet shooting. So it was a lot of fun. It's like I said, training is the first casualty of budget cuts, and of course you love that stuff. But then we shift a lot of our training money to diversity and kind of training and mandated training from the state that don't necessarily change a lot of things. And I had issues of all the professions. I think law enforcement interacts the most with people in the community, and they are probably the most tolerant and accepting of others just because they're in those communities all the time. Yet people in Sacramento or other places say, well, we need to train them more so that they're tolerant and understand and all this other stuff. Yet I always felt most of the people telling me to come down here have never even been to places more diverse than the neighborhoods they live in, right? I mean, a lot of the people who were making these comments never actually been to Compton or South LA or East LA. They just and then we all need to be trained. Do you kind of agree with that, Michael? These people live in a bubble and they have assumptions about law enforcement. Yeah.
When you end up in court, you're expected to remember all this stuff, and like you said, it's a perishable skill. It just kills me. That was the first thing that was taking part was training because we needed it constantly. And it was actually a lot of fun to do. But they expect you to be just as good as you were the first time you learned it. Well, the more you learn it, the better and better you get. And then to have someone pull out a book, well, you want the training back in, 1980 something, and it's now 2000, you should be just as good now. I'm so busy doing what I'm doing. You want somebody to training? I'm begging to go to training. And you're right about the shotguns. Having those old Ithaca boomers, those things are awesome.
Well, I would much rather. I wasn't as good as Danny at my handgun there, but it's decent. So having a shotgun, I probably could hit the guy with the shotgun. Right, that's the way I always thought, So let's get into the robbery scene because it sets up who Clint is, and the thing about this scene, and I really wanted to talk about it, is what his partner has to go through here. So these guys are doing a stakeout for some robbery suspects that are. Doesn't really explain how they figured out where they might hit, but his partner is acting as a clerk. Clint Eastwood is behind some two-way glass, and these 3 gangsters or robbers come in, and they're going to rob the place. And they use the N-word in this scene, which is you don't really hear that a lot in movies now. But in part of the scene, they end up pointing a shotgun. One of these suspects ends up pointing a shotgun at Clint's partner. And he says he's going to kill him, and he can't get it to his gun right away. And Clint is behind him, and they got this young police officer also with a shotgun. So at least he had the right weapon, right, and ready to go. But and Clint is waiting until the right moment to shoot. Now, what got me about this scene is just what's going through his partner's head as this gun is being pointed at him. The tunnel vision, the stress of this entire situation, and until you've had a gun pointed at you and you think somebody's going to shoot you, you can't really understand that. And what do you think, Danny? You've interviewed guys that have been in shootings before.
Yeah. Well, and the partner is disguised as a clerk there, and his gun is on a shelf within reach, but not, you can't really reach for it when someone's got a gun pointed at you. So I'm sure that he's sitting there thinking, hey, anytime now, Harry, come out and do your stuff. But yeah, that was quite a scene. And, I don't know if anyone still does that type of surveillance, but LAPD's SIS was famous for that. They would follow, they would work pattern and series robberies, and they would set up waiting for these guys to come do a job. And of course, there's a lot of controversy about it too. And they were in a lot of shootings.
Yeah, my dad worked for Detroit Police, and they had a unit called Stress, and I forget what the name of it, but it was the same kind of thing where they would do setups, and they got in a lot of shootings, and SIS got in a lot of shootings. And I will say, I do agree if there's another way to take them down without avoiding shooting, that's the way that we need to go. But yeah, this was consistent with the policing at the time, because my dad worked, that was going on, let's see, would have been in the 70s, that Stress was going on, and SIS was big in the 70s and 80s. I think they kind of did they get disbanded, or they changed their tactics into the 90s and 2000s, if I remember correctly, Danny, because I think they were under a lot of pressure from the public.
Yeah, I believe they still exist, but they definitely had to change some of the ways that they did things. And one of the things that the theory behind this, like in this scene, is they're waiting for them to actually commit the crime. And of course, our justice system is problematic in that way. It's like if these guys are doing robberies and they're doing robberies, you should be able to stop them before they come in, without losing the case. I mean, you don't want to put people at risk, just so that you can say they did commit a robbery and then we apprehended them or shot them or whatever you do. But I mean, if they caught them outside on their way in, that would get argued down to just possession of a firearm, or intent, or something far less severe than armed robbery.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand the logic of both sides of this, and I think it's just the cost of litigation has partly changed our strategies too. I mean, because every time you do something like this would have obviously led to lawsuits. Why didn't you try and take them down sooner? That kind of stuff. Say, I just want to tell folks, as if you're watching us, we're on YouTube channel Pop Culture Minefield, but we also opened up on Rumble. You can go to Rumble. It's Pop Culture Minefield Rumble, and if you're watching us on YouTube, remember to subscribe and like and comment and share the video. And if you're watching us on Rumble, or if you're watching us on YouTube, do us a favor, go over to Rumble and watch it there as well. But also follow us on Rumble. We need to get up our following on Rumble. I guess it helps with the cost or some other thing like that. I've been told to push it, so I'm pushing it now. So this robbery scene, though, I just couldn't. The actor, I can't imagine going through the scene. I wouldn't want to have the shotgun pointed at me, and just a very scary situation for a police officer, because it's just a slight pull of that trigger, because the shotgun is just a tap. It isn't a squeeze, right? What do you think, Mike?
I think the officer is going through a lot of stuff. You got to remember the time again. It's 1973. You got a guy calling him names that we don't even use anymore. So he was taking it personally too, and he didn't want to take a knee. There's a lot of pride in that as an officer and as a man, and you could see him fighting it internally. Harry's hoping he'd get down on his knees so he could take a shot, because he couldn't take a shot yet. So it made it really difficult. You were talking about SIS, and I remember their famous shooting out in Sunland and the McDonald's. But in this scene, how would we do it today? If they'd have taken the first guy that was inside, who turned out to be the driver later on, the lookout guy, or lead guy, if they'd have stopped him then, do you have the robbery? No, but you probably got a probable cause arrest or a reasonable cause arrest for the other three guys in the car. Obviously, they would have had weapons. So it's possible that a couple of good, sharp officers who can write well, they could have got him before it got that far. But it wouldn't have made the movie any better. So
yeah.
Well, you're right. I think he knew once he hit that knee, he was gonna shoot him. So I mean, that's why he didn't want to go down. Hey, let's roll into the next scene, and this is the Drano scene. And sometimes, uh, movies are inspired by pop culture and our culture, and sometimes movies inspire events in our world today. And in this case, it's you have a beautiful, I forget her name, beautiful actress. I looked her up, and she's actually wonderful, and she plays a prostitute. She just worked a hotel, made a lot of money, and prostitutes do work hotels. They go to those conferences. I will tell you, I was in Vegas for Baker to Vegas, and a lot of my friends of course, it was a drinking thing. I was a little higher up in the ranks, so I wasn't quite as drunk as them, and I was playing a machine as they went to breakfast. It was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 in the morning. And I hit a nice $300 jackpot. And I said, oh, okay, now it's time to go to breakfast, right? And gal comes up to me and says, hey, you're looking for a date. So she was obviously working the hotel. She saw me win big on the slot machine, and she was hoping to earn some money that night. I said, no, thank you. And I went and visited went and had breakfast with my friends. So it does happen. Prostitutes do work the hotel, but she has a pimp, and she's been hiding from the pimp. She's got a lot of money. She's in a taxi, and this pimp gets in. And this is the guy, Mike. He was in the first Dirty Harry, and he was a bank robber, and he was the one who said, I got to know, because Dirty did his whole thing. This is the 44 Magnum shot. You just got to ask, do you feel lucky, punk? And he had a shotgun available to him, and he chose not to go for the shotgun. And then he says to Dirty, I gotta know. And Dirty pulls the trigger, and the hammer drops, and it's on an empty cylinder. He was out of ammunition, right? Because that was the scene where he shot. He says, I don't know.
Yeah, he was talking to
him. 5 shots or 6
5
shots, and all this confusion.
6.
Yeah, and. So that's the role he played in that movie. Now he's the pimp in this movie, and in this case, she's been holding out on her pimp. And pimps were pretty prevalent when I started. I'm sure they still exist today. And I want to say in California, they abolished loitering with intent to commit prostitution, which I was against. I did a radio show on another platform and explained why it's a problem. And because loitering with intent to do prosecution allowed police officers to contact people who clearly were doing prostitution, and then take them off the street for a misdemeanor. And many of the groups that advocate for people who are being trafficked were against the law as well. But Scott Wiener in California said, "Oh no, it's discriminating against transsexual, so we have to get rid of it." And once we got rid of it, and this happened in January, we've seen a spike in street prostitution across the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles. So it didn't help anybody. It only hurt people that are getting trafficked. So there's my political rant for the day. But in this case, she's holding out on him, and he finds that out, and he decides he's going to kill her. And he uses Drano. He pours Drano down her throat. Now, this is a pretty traumatic scene. Drano will burn you inside, and it kills her. But this scene inspired some robbers who were going to do a robbery. Some airmen who in Ogden, in Utah, decided to do a robbery of a high-end hi-fi shop in Ogden, Utah. And 6 people went in. They only managed to identify 3 of these suspects. And they had 5 victims in the store that they took hostage. And for 2 hours, they tortured these guys, including forcing them to drink Drano. They ended up killing 3 of them. They raped 1 girl, killed and shot them all. And then 1 guy didn't die, and they put a pen in his ear and then stomped the pen into his ear. So these were some really, really bad dudes. So, and they were inspired to do this from watching the scene from Dirty Harry. Really, really awful. It's called the Hi-Fi Murders in Ogden, Utah. It happened in 1974, so it would have been about a year after this. Here's the newspaper report at the time of this. 2 of these guys got the death penalty and were eventually put to death. There was a lot of drama that there was race was involved in the conviction. And let's clarify, when you hear that, do yourself a favor and actually do some research on the case, because these anti-death penalty advocates will throw whatever it takes out there to win. They're ideologues. Ogden, Utah was predominantly white, and these guys were from a local air base. They were airmen and decided to do this robbery. This was an awful, vicious, brutal murder where they tortured them. And in terms of, I would have to say it's the worst, the worst event, one of the worst events I had ever heard of. This is not a typical robbery. And they were arguing that they were treated differently than potentially white suspects. And I can't imagine anybody not getting the death penalty for what they did in this case. So there was no differential treatment. They made him drink Drano. They put a pen in one guy's ear. They stomped it on his face. They brutally raped an 18-year-old girl over and over again before they shot her in the head. This was vicious and awful, but they went in with Drano with the intent of killing them with Drano, which was just an awful situation. And I think the other thing that I read when I read this case is they said, they didn't get a fair trial because they struck the lone African-American person in the jury pool. And this is where I say, turn over rocks. Okay. Well, they clarified that the only African-American one, it's like 99% white in Ogden, Utah. The one African-American in the jury pool was a police officer who knew the prosecutors and some of the police officers. He couldn't be on the jury, but they don't tell you that when they say, oh, it was clearly discriminatory because they struck this black person who couldn't have been on the jury anyway. So a lot of different disinformation, a lot of lies to present a narrative simply to get these two vicious killers off from the death penalty. Danny, we've run into nasty people like you've run into nasty people like this before. But this was, I don't know if you got a chance to read up on this particular murder, but it was simply awful, and it was inspired by this movie.
Yeah, I never heard of that case, and very interesting. I'm glad you brought it up. But yeah, the death penalty is appropriate in my opinion. Some people, they just need to die for their crimes, and I had many cases that should have been death penalty cases, and in LA County we have the DA's office has what's called a death committee, and they vote. If you have a special circumstances murder, and that's how you can try to seek the death penalty, and your options are either the death penalty or life without the possibility of parole, and there's certain criteria that has to be met in order to have a case like that. In fact, it's enumerated crimes, the torture, the kidnap, off the top of my head, I'm drawing a blank, but I used to be able to rattle them off, the various, lying in wait. So if those elements exist, then you would seek death, and 98% of the time the death committee in the DA's office would not go for the death penalty, and there's probably a number of reasons why. I'm sure that they're more difficult to prosecute, and they just don't like to prosecute, to seek death. But sometimes they did, and they would, and I've had death penalty cases. I actually put a woman on death row, and she'll never die. They won't put her to death. But the one thing that about to me, the problem with our justice system is we've seen a lot of killers, including cop killers, that were given life without the possibility of parole, who eventually have their sentences communed by some wacko liberal governor, and next thing you know, they're being released from prison, where they've done just horrible, horrific crimes and murdered innocent, decent people or police officers, and then they're back out on the streets, during our career still. We're still doing the job, and someone they killed a colleague, back in when you were a boot, is now back on the streets, and you shake your head and go, how is that possible? And that's why, in my opinion, some people should be put to death. They just should.
Well, I can't think of a more vicious and brutal case than the hi-fi murders, and anybody, I think everybody would have agreed that no matter who the race of the perpetrators or even or the victims, that it would have been a death penalty case. But I'm just saying, when these advocates push a narrative, do yourself a favor, turn over a few rocks to see what the truth is. Martin, let's go ahead in the next scene. But Mike, as he pulls those scenes up, can I get any comments on the Drano scene, and if you get a chance to look at the hi-fi murders at all, and what your thoughts are?
Well, one thing you brought up that gnawed at me was the race card. I'm sick and tired of it. I worked, and so did you too, with some of the best cops in the entire world. And we didn't go out there looking at people based on the race. And I don't want to use the term wrong, but us versus them. It was the cops, and then it was the people we were dealing with. And race wasn't a factor for anybody. It just wasn't. Unfortunately, movies and TV and the news push that thing, and people just believe it because they saw it. And it, strap on a gun belt, put on a badge, and you'll see for yourself. We didn't look at it that way. We never did. Any more than the bad guys in this case you're talking about, they didn't go commit the crime because they were a certain race. They committed the crime because they're criminals.
Yeah.
And people just don't get that. It was just people. We weren't raised and taught like that. And I'm sick and tired of it. It was as bad as the line, "Don't you know who I am?" Well, no, give me your driver's license and I'll figure it out because it's written on there. But that race car thing needs to go out the window years ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. Martin, go ahead and bring up the scene Charge, I think is the name of what I named the next scene. But Mike, the very first two people that I know who tried to kill me were two white drug dealers. So if you were focused on race, and not on your toes and made assumptions of people based on race, you missed cues that it could have potentially saved your life, right? I always say, hey, you got to look at what is going on versus what is what were the circumstances, not what the person's color of the person is, so
Right.
so here we go. We have this guy ends up killing somebody. I'm trying to remember this particular murder. There's so many different murders in the scene, but this is
This
yeah,
is the
go
one
ahead,
up in the hotel room.
Yeah, that's right. And it was interesting because here you got the gangster, and he's got a guy and a girl there that he's playing with. So he's obviously bisexual, and they have a couple of guys doing surveillance. So this is where DiGiorgio or John Mitchum is in this scene, and this guy breaks in. He goes up through, which is interesting. We didn't have a lot of high rises in a lot of the areas that we policed. I think West Hollywood was one of the few ones where we had a ton of high rises. He manages to go up and down and get into position where he can sneak into this building and shot the bad guy who was a mafioso guy, and the two people that he was making love with. And it is David Soul who ends up being the assassin in this case. But as he comes out, this is the ends justify the means. He corners an unknowing motorcycle cop. Somebody near the end of his career, probably should retire. I think it's Charlie. I can't remember Charlie's.
Charlie McCoy.
Charlie McCoy, and Charlie, of course, smiles because he thinks, "Oh, it's just another motor cop. Hey, who are you?" And motor cops are very cliquish. That's what I noticed. I had 23 motors that worked for me when I was at Transit. Very cliquish. They know each other. They like it. They party together. They socialize together. They're all very cliquish. And they know they got a wonderful formal assignment, and they don't want to mess it up. But he ends up killing Charlie because Charlie's in the wrong place at the wrong time and could figure out who they are. So I think this is completely unrealistic. I think if you're in the movie, these guys are trying, their ends justify the means, but killing a police officer, does that justify the means here? So here we got a police killer here last year, 2 years, and he's okay. I'm not sure what you're saying there, but okay. Thanks for the comment, and hey, thanks for going over to Rumble. I saw your comment that you're going to go listen to us at Rumble as well. But what'd you think of the scene, Mike? Charlie McCoy gets killed, and I forget the name of the actor here. I've seen him in other stuff before too.
What one of the things that was unrealistic about this, besides going up in the building the whole bit, he puts a silencer on that Magnum, and it wouldn't work that way. There's too much of a gap, and it wouldn't have been quiet whatsoever. That was strictly movie. And then to kill another cop, that was insane. And then they ended up trying to use him as a scapegoat later on. And in the beginning of that scene, actually, Charlie got hit by a car while he was on his motorcycle. So he was in there probably calming down or cooling off and getting himself back together. And then not only does he shoot him, but the second shot, he takes a headshot at him, and that was pathetic. That was terrible.
Yeah, I think the silencer is the cool factor for the movie. I don't know, Dan, did you ever investigate a homicide where a silencer was actually used?
No, never did.
Yeah, I think it's, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, and an interesting part about that whole deal is, in the movie they kind of get you thinking Charlie's going to be one of the killers, from the beginning. They profile him as this guy that's just really fed up with the system, and he's just gone through his third divorce, and he's bitter and he's pissed, and he's making comments that sound like he's going to end in a flash, and I felt like that scene where the door opens and you see Charlie, they're trying to make you think he's the one that had been upstairs and doing the killing, at first, and then the next thing you see is the other motor that's going to shoot him. But yeah, it was. I mean, it's Hollywood,
Right, and I think Clint Eastwood is he's beginning to figure it out. I mean, he's pulled back in the homicide and this event, but he realizes, as based on information that he's getting from his friends, that it's almost like a motor cop pulled him over on on both the pimp, who was later killed by a motor cop, and the Rikaka, whatever the first guys, the gangsters were killed. And he's already beginning to think, and then he and their magnums that are used, he puts the two together. I think at the time, most coppers were issued those 38s, just like us. I bet you San Francisco had the standard 38s. What, I forget the name of that gun or the model.
The Model 15.
Model 15. But these guys are carrying 357. He remembers that, and it's almost like the pimp had his ID out and some money out when he was killed, like he was pulled over. So Clint is starting to put all this stuff together, which is why Briggs didn't want him in homicide. But because all of these murders are happening, I think Briggs got overruled. They showed that. And Clint and his partner are now back in homicide. And he immediately begins to test his theory. And he uses, these guys are all going to compete in a shootout or a shoot-off to see who's the best shooter for the department, right? So, and it rolls right into that. And Clint is suspicious, and he is going to allay suspicion, and he's going to use. So as you guys said, that Clint is smarter than these guys, and he's a couple steps ahead of these guys in figuring out all. He doesn't get the whole picture. He's pretty sure it's this crew of guys that he met at the range that are doing this. So in the shoot-off, a couple of interesting things here is before this, on the sheriff's department, I think they had pistol competitions. I was never into that. It was a group of people that did that, but it was standard range shooting and then some combat shooting. But we never really had a Hogan's Alley, or we called it Laser Village, that I can recall when I was before this movie, or when I started. And it was later something that was developed. Laser Village came later, where you had this kind of half city where you can do situational stuff. But Clint is putting it together. He's figured it out. Danny, do you remember? Did we have a Laser Village when you first started, or did that get built after you came on the sheriff's department?
I honestly can't remember. I remember going there and training there, but I mean, like you, I was on the Hill. Trained at the academy at Biscaloo Center before they moved to Whittier, and of course that's where Laser Village ended up being. So now that I kind of think about it, I don't think it could have been there at that time. I think it was built later after the academy was moved.
And I think
actually, I worked with the range. I'm sorry, I worked with the range staff back in the 80s and early 80s as an explorer. There was a Hogan's Alley at Wayside. It wasn't used normally for just the in-service. Usually it was guys from special units, but they had one very similar to the one in this movie, up to the right and off on a different path that most deputies did not know about, but it was there.
So it's something for the SWAT team and other specialized teams, maybe narcotics, but not something for the average Joe. And that's what happens when you got major departments like ours. It's scarce resources, so you narrow the amount of people that can actually get that kind of training. But anyways, during the shootout, I mean, Clint shoots, and then these guys are all shooting. And Clint, during his the shoot off here, they do the regular shooting, and then they do the shoot off with Hogan's Alley. Clint shoots a good guy. He shoots a police officer, right? And now personally think he's sending a message to them. I know it's you. That's what I believe about this scene. And do you agree with that, Danny?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. When he first does it, I think, right away I thought, well, it wasn't a mistake. And my first thought was he's throwing the competition, led him to congratulate the guy and use his gun, and then of course, put a bullet where he could get it later. But I think that you're right. I think he was also sending a message of, that he can shoot a man in uniform too. So kind of interesting. I mean, I guess there's no way to know for sure, but subliminally, I think that could have been a message.
Yeah, I know it's you guys, and that was the other thing. He borrows the gun. He borrows his gun, and he purposely shoots a place where he knows the bullet will likely implants itself, so he can go back and retrieve it. And Mike, what'd you think of the shooting scene?
I agree with you 1,000% that shooting the cop was done on purpose, and it was a headshot on top of everything else. So I think it was a big, loud message. I thought it was, well, as an old timer, interesting seeing a Kel light after all these years. Most of the new guys wouldn't know what that is. But no, it was very well written by Eastwood and whoever did the movie with that. And definitely a message, a subliminal message that I think it's you and I'm coming and I'm not afraid of you.
Yeah, I just for the audience, a Cal light is a very large flashlight. Usually, what is it, 4 D batteries in it, and
4 or 5
Cal light or streamlight, and it was encased in steel. So, and if you were working at night, you had it in your hand a lot, and many times it ended up being your first weapon of choice when somebody attacked you if you had your flashlight out. So it served dual purposes, but always. I don't think many of the politicians ever really liked us carrying that, but we switched to these really small, really bright flashlights. Now that seems to be the name of the game. So, Danny, I did want to get into the ballistics, the science of ballistics. So the fact that he shot this, he hit it in the door frame, that's all pretty realistic. If you get a clear bullet out of your victims, a clean bullet out of your victims, and then a clean sample bullet. That is a good way to make a connection in an investigative case, right?
Oh, it's excellent. Although I kind of cringed at Harry being the firearms examiner as well. I mean, that's a big disservice. Our firearms examiners are these guys are highly trained and skilled, and it's not something a layman can grab a microscope and say, yeah, okay, this bullet was fired from this weapon, or it matches this bullet. It's a very scientific process, and it might have been better, of course it's Hollywood, but it might have been better if Harry had gone to the crime lab and had a connection there and said, hey, do me a favor, compare this bullet with that one and let me know what you think. But I don't know any homicide guys that can do their own ballistic analysis.
Well, 2 things here. I think one, they either wanted to save money and didn't want to pay another actor to do that, which is probably right. Or maybe he doesn't know who's part of this conspiracy, so he wants to try and do some minimal analysis himself. But yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, I got a chance to work with. I was on the union, and they had a guy from the crime lab there, and he talked about the training those go through. They're all pretty much scientists. I mean, that's what they are, and really smart guys. And I don't think, in my opinion, they get enough credit for the work they do. Although CSI has shined a positive light on them. It was interesting. He did tell me CSI made it such a popular field that it's glutted, and they get to keep their salaries down because so many people want to go into it. But they can make a case, right, Danny?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, ballistics is a really important part of any homicide investigation.
Okay, let's go into the next. This is the raid. So what I noticed is Lieutenant Briggs, who's running all of these investigations, and I have to tell you, I have to ask this question, Danny. I mean, I was a detective lieutenant, but I think there was a couple of high-profile cases where I was a little more engaged with the investigators. But I was attempting to run political interference, and so that my investigators were left alone so they can investigate. One was a very serious gay bashing case in West Hollywood. It was all over the news, and it's just creating all kinds of problem. And I'm just trying to make sure they have the resources to solve the crime. And that was really my biggest role, actually directing the investigation, who's going to do what. Investigations, homicides, you go where the evidence takes you, right? And in this case, this lieutenant is directing them to suspects. And obviously he doesn't want the case solved, but he's directing way more than I remember lieutenants would. Did you ever have big case like that where a lieutenant is actually directing the case? I mean, usually we left up the investigators to give us the path forward, and then we were the ones providing support and maybe keeping the political animals at bay while they solved the case.
At homicide, sheriff's homicide, some other agencies might be different, but we didn't have to deal with that very often. And the reason for that is that you didn't have to be an investigator to become a lieutenant at homicide. So there were guys that came to homicide as lieutenants, and they had never worked homicide themselves, and most of them were smart enough to not try to direct seasoned homicide investigators on how to do their job. They were there, their job was administrative in nature. And most of them, were pretty good at sticking to that. Now, we did have a couple of lieutenants who had worked homicide as deputies and then sergeants, and they were fabulous guys. And their input would be welcome because they were seasoned.
Yeah.
And then there were times where that there would be suggestions and things of that nature. But our homicide bureau was definitely structured in a way that the investigators called the shots, and they directed the investigation, and you didn't have a lieutenant telling them, go do this and go do that.
And I think just for clarify, so some agencies, you pick a path. LAPD, you kind of pick a path, right? You go investigative route. I mean, you can go back and forth, but it's mostly when you pick the investigative route, that's what you stick to most of your career. You pick patrol, and I think NYPD is that way. We're different in that you can move in and out, and I mean, there's some pluses and minuses to that. And the minus is sometimes getting a boss that doesn't know what they're doing but wants to feel like they're in charge, right? They want the big case comes along, they want to look like they're solving it. And I just realized I did have some investigative experience. I wouldn't say it was a huge amount, but it was really just about supporting my team as best I could when they handled difficult cases, and we did solve our cases, right? So, but it's also keeping the politics when you have a politically challenging case. Just trying to explain the realities of investigations to folks and what charges you can bring based upon the evidence. I think that was Lieutenant's job to run that political interference. And I don't know, Mike, did you ever work for somebody where there was a lot of politics, and the good boss is the guy that kept the politics away, the bad boss is the guy that expect you to change the way you acted or did your business just because of the political realities?
I always found the best bosses are the ones that were quiet and in the background. I was a watch deputy at many different places I worked, and I was left alone to do what I needed to do as the watch deputy and get my guys where they needed to go. And did I have the brass come in the room? Sure. But they kept quiet unless it was like a crazy pursuit. But other than that, they let us do our jobs. And if I never saw them go off the reservation, and it was much, much better. They were very well respected. I had some really good brass that I worked for, and one or two duds here and there, but not for very long. They'd move on.
Well, so this raid, they send Dirty Harry, they put him in charge of this raid, they send him after this gangster, and then somebody does a cold call, most likely Briggs or somebody related to him, to say that they're going to be raided and they're going to look like cops. And it leads to a shootout in which, all the bad guys are pretty much killed, but one of the crew, one of the young police officers is, I guess, sacrificed. Sweet. I think it was Tim Matheson's character.
Correct.
Was shot through the door and killed. And I think this was it's inferred that this was Briggs' attempt to try and get rid of Dirty Harry, figuring he'd be leading the charge. Maybe Harry would be killed in this raid. And of course he's not, and he manages to survive because Dirty Harry's got to survive. But this is now he's if he hasn't quite figured out, he's really starting to put it together. Although he still hasn't quite figured out that Briggs is the guy. He ends up showing Briggs the bullet. He says he thinks he's these police officers. He asked for these guys to be part of the raid because he wants to watch them, and then one of them is killed, right? So he recognizes that that's what's going on. And not long after this, he gets confronted by these guys because Briggs knows that Harry knows, and these guys know that Harry knows, and Harry is now a threat to those guys. And they've already set him up. They've probably already planted the bombs in his mailbox. They planted the bomb in the mailbox for his partner who was killed. But he meets with these guys in a scene that I labeled as "You Heroes," right? And in this scene, they actually the three of them that are left, confront him and ask him to join. Right. And as Mike said earlier, he says, I think you guys have misjudged me. And I think if I remember correctly, he says something else in this scene. He says, we have to have some law. Right. So even though Dirty Harry, the ends justify the means for Dirty Harry in some ways, he recognizes that he says it, the system's not perfect. It's kind of broken, but it's what we have. And we got to try and do the best we can with it. And he says no to these guys, but they've already made their decision. If it's a no, then they're going to kill him, and they've already planted those bombs to kill him. Do you remember the scene, Mike? Do you remember it?
Very well.
What'd you think?
As far as being filmed, I thought it was done well because it was all very, very dark in the parking lot, and they actually surprised him. When he got out of the car, he had no clue they were there. I liked the fact that the character Harry Callahan tells him, "You've misjudged me." He's a good cop. He's just a tough cop. And what tipped me off when I was younger watching it was they didn't kill him. They immediately just drove off. And I'm thinking, all right, there's got to be another shoe to fall down. And there was. The bomb was in the mailbox. But they were interesting to listen to. And, we're the new breed. Well, no, you're a bunch of nuts. But they definitely believed in what they were doing. And at no point did they tip off about Briggs.
No. Danny, what'd you think of this scene?
I mean, again, it's Hollywood, right? It would be a little unusual for these guys to think that old Dirty Harry's going to join them. But I think that Harry started figuring out that the lieutenant was with them after he had him look at those bullets, because from that point on, he clearly doesn't trust him. So it was a little bit odd that after the mailbox bomb and stuff, he ends up kind of being oblivious to that whole thing, and the lieutenant coming over to well, let's go and let's take my car, and that they had to set it up that way, for the show, but Harry would have been too smart for that.
Yeah, he's probably already got it figured out. And Martin, so just roll right into I hate the system, because that's the next scene. So, I mean, Harry, he tells these guys no, and they put a bomb in his mailbox, and I didn't use that scene, but you remember he's taken apart his mailbox, right? Remember this scene? And he's doing the mailbox, and his neighbor's coming down and just giving a hard time, and what are you doing? Why are you taking it? That's my mailbox too. Don't you understand that? And oh, you're the cop. I am a cop. Oh, you're the cop upstairs. Like, oh, I'd love to meet you. And now he meets him, right? And he takes out a bomb. He goes, well, what's that? That's a bomb. And he goes, really? He goes, yeah, if you'd have bothered me anymore, we'd all be sticking off the ceiling. So, I mean, that was a great, did you remember that? I thought that was a fantastic line. I didn't use the scene, but do you remember that scene, Mike? I really thought it was fantastic.
Well, and then the last thing that the neighbor says is, I don't want to get involved, and he takes off.
Exactly.
Which is what most people would do.
Well, if you bother me anymore, we'd all be sticking off the ceiling. That typical, a great Dirty Harry quip, and this nosy neighbor who's being kind of a pain in the behind. So in this scene, though, I hate the system. Now he's doing this confrontation with with Briggs, and a la the carjacking, Briggs just gets the drop on him and gets his gun, takes his gun away, takes his bullets away, and now he's pointing a gun at Harry, and of course Harry distracts him away, and then he of course beats Briggs. He doesn't end up getting his gun, but I don't know what Briggs thought. He's going to get in the car with this guy, and he's going to be able to control this situation. Not Briggs versus Dirty Harry. And this is, and Briggs is talking to him about it. Well, you of all people should understand. And I think this is the time when he says, I hate the system. You don't understand, Briggs. I hate the system. But it's the system we got, basically, I think is what he says here. And he ends up crashing the car, and Briggs, I think, falls out of the car at one point. And now it's the final scene where he's taken on all these different motorcycle cops and killing them. And so what'd you think of the scene, Mike?
It was an interesting scene. I was very careful. I watched it a second time, and his Model 29, the 44 Mag, gets thrown in the back seat. And that's the last time in the movie you actually see it. He made him throw the bullets out the window, but not the gun. A great chase scene, an interesting switch in what motorcycles were used. You had to watch carefully for that one.
Well, go ahead, get into it, Mike. What's the you're a motorcycle guy. What's up with the motorcycles?
Well, the original, those are all Moto Guzzi Eldorados that were used in the film. And then when they do the aircraft scene, they switched over to the Triumph Tigers. The only guess I have is maybe the Triumph Tiger was a little bit narrower and could get up the ramps like they did. That's a guess only.
Would it have been a lighter so they could do the jumps?
It's possible. They did beef up the front end to make it look like the Moto Guzzi. So I thought the chase scene was a lot of fun. It really was a good ending to it. Harry kills Robert Urick's character with the car. He actually rams him with it, which was one heck of a tactic. And the car keeps functioning. Man, I get a dent on my car, thing stops. So,
well, these are older cars, right? 70s cars. I'm from Detroit. They're built to last, right? Maybe 5 years. But and the interesting thing is he ends up killing all of these cops, or these bad guys, without using a weapon. So he kills one with the car, right? And the other one, I think he ends up in some kind of military mothball ship, and he kills one with his bare hands, right? He catches him in the dark area, and it indicates that he breaks his neck or his larynx, whatever, and he chokes to death. And then the last guy, I think it was David Soul's character, they're chasing each other on the aircraft carrier or whatever. I think it was some kind of aircraft carrier or something like that. And he manages, and of course, Dirty Harry's got to drive the motorcycle himself. He manages to skid to a stop before he hits the end of the aircraft carrier, and the other guy flies into the water, and he's killed there. So, but it was interesting. He did not use his 44 to take these guys on. He killed them all with his ingenuity and his bare hands. What do you think, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, the scene was definitely a good climatic ending. I would, back to the vehicle, it was interesting just seeing those cars, because of course cops always, you think about, the cars you had when you were young and how they evolved. And of course, this is before any of us were cops, right? This is the 70s, early 70s. And they're those big Fords, Ford Galaxies, Ford Custom 500s. And those things were beasts, just big, huge machines that probably got about 6 miles to the gallon, and no one cared, because you're paying 40 cents a gallon, for fuel. But no, that was cool. And it was, I mean, there was a lot of policies that were violated during that ending, but I don't think Dirty Harry cares too much about that.
No, when I graduated high school, I got an old police cruiser, Plymouth, I forget what it was, Sebring, whatever. Plymouth Fury, yeah, it was one of those, and that's what I drove from 18 to 19 before I moved to California. It was this kind of rust bucket. I grew up in Detroit, so everything got salted. So, but it was my ghetto ride, and I grew up with collar, and it cost me $250, and I had a car, right? So. but it was a big car, and it had the police interceptor engine in it, so it could go fast too. But
Yeah.
I grew up all those big old cars, and so let's go into the last scene here. So he's had his confrontation with the crew. He's killed off all of our guys that go on to great careers as actors, right? And this is where he has his final confrontation with Briggs, and this is so Briggs somehow survives this, manages to get his gun, and now confronts Harry, who's in this car that still drives, which is amazing. And Harry remembers that the bond's available, and I don't know why Briggs didn't kill him. He already killed 3 police officers, but I think he wants to. Oh, I know it. He says he wants Harry to be tried by the system that he loves so much, I guess, is his goal here, to make a point. But as Briggs drives away, he arms that bomb and he drops it in the car, and it blows up. And after it blows up, he says the line, and this is the classic line for this particular show: "Man's got to know his limitations." Now, this is the one I of all of the lines, I remember this one, and there's a lot of people who punch higher than their weight, right, on the sheriff's department and other law enforcement. But man's got to know his limitations. What'd you think of the scene, Danny? And kind of agree with the quip?
Yeah, it was a great line, and I think actually wasn't it? I think that line was used early in the show when he first was arguing with Griggs about something. I can't remember for sure, but it seemed to me when he used that line at the very end of the movie, it was kind of a coming back full circle. That in the beginning he had said something like that to him. But yeah, I mean, it was great, and of course, one of the things I thought, as far as why didn't Griggs just kill him, as you ask rhetorically here, to me, Griggs had already said that he never even had pulled his gun, in the line of duty. He bragged about that, and of course, Eastwood thought that was just, uh, he scoffed at that remark, and I had to think, well, so even now at the end, I mean, clearly it's going to be the end, but he still doesn't have what it takes to shoot Harry. That's how I took it.
Yeah. It's the other thing too. I think in the first one, if you remember the first movie, some guy says, "Well, I work personnel," and he says, "Well, personnel is for, I forget, assholes and something else," and it goes, "Well, I worked personnel for 10 years," So he did not have a lot of respect for the guys who didn't work the streets, and
Right.
and it's a little part of a culture of any police department, Mike. The guys that are out there hustling, working in the radar car or working high-profile detective units, they get a little more respect than the guys who are working personnel or behind the scene. And remember, I retired as chief. Those are very valuable positions. We need people to do them, but we tend to respect the guys who work the streets, who are
if you're the one out there
facing with our criminals. Huh? Go ahead.
If you're the one out there kicking rocks, those are the ones. They have the best jobs. Danny was right. In the first time when the lieutenant talks about not ever drawing his holster, the line was, "Well, you're a good man, Lieutenant. A good man always knows his limitations."
There you go.
And he did change it up at the end, and I said, a man's got to know his limitations." So yeah, he varied it a little bit. And Eastwood's movies, he always brings something back. In this scene with the bomb, it's the 70s. Recycling starting. He recycled the weapon. I mean, he says it could still be used. He sets a timer. Have a nice day. Kaboom. Goodbye, Lieutenant. Very aware of what year it was.
Right. Well, first of all, I guess later on shows it's Make My Day, right? Which we saw, and that also enters the culture. And so this one didn't quite hit the same mark as Make My Day or some of the other ones, but I always remembered this particular tagline. And I want to thank you guys for coming on the show and helping me go through this movie and actually talking about a little bit of the stuff that's going on today. Danny R. Smith, you can find his books on Amazon. Mike Ascolese, you can make a donation to what's the organization again, Mike?
It's called Fueled by the Fallen, and you can find him on Facebook, and also following Kevin Major Howard.
Okay, I want to remind you guys, if you to make a donation to the LA Mission at lamission.org. Also, if you're following us on YouTube, remember to like the video, subscribe on YouTube, and share it with a friend. Make a comment also. And you can go over to Rumble there. If you're an aficionado of YouTube, do us a favor and go over to Rumble and watch the show on Rumble and that one you don't subscribe to. You follow us on Rumble. You like the video, make a comment, and share it with a friend. Danny, did you have a good time on this show? Did you like the show?
I did. Yeah, I did, Chief. I appreciate you having me on both times now. It's been a blast. It's a very different format. I do a lot of podcast appearances, but this one's just, a lot of fun. It's pretty cool. So thank you very much for having me, and it was good getting to know Mike. Mike actually gave me a call the other day after we all texted together, and chatting with him was kind of cool too. So yeah, thanks, Chief. Appreciate it.
No problem. And thank you for coming on, Mike. You have a good time. Can you be a victim in the future for me again?
Oh, absolutely. And it was terrific meeting Danny. I've read about him. I hadn't had a chance to meet him. So talking to him was great. And I don't care if you retired as a chief, you're still Deputy Jordan to me when I was in that car.
That's right. Well, thank you very much. Martin, I think we are done with the show, and take it away.
Okay.
Stick around for a debrief, guys.
Those sons of bitches.
Ma, I'm doing a show!